You know, when I went to seminary, there was a preaching professor who said when he graded papers by young seminarians, when we were writing sermons, he would often write in the margin, YBH. I'll tell you what that means in a second. I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Steve Green, and this episode of Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. Well, YBH means yes, but how? And when I heard over and over President Trump proclaiming before he was president that we plan to drain the swamp, I wanted to write YBH in the margin of his teleprompter. Well, now, a spunky senator from Nebraska, I believe, is that where Ben Sasse is from?
I believe so.
Decided to submit some legislation. He has proposed a package of legislation that is going to drain the swamp in his terms. And this is what it includes. And forgive me, I have grown old in the service of my country and almost blind. And let me just pull up the list of things that this legislation is going to include. We're going to prohibit cabinet members and their immediate family from soliciting donations from foreign sources. Take that, Hillary Clinton. We're going to create a public database of congressional HR settlements and make disclosure quicker and increase personal financial liability for members of Congress. Congressional HR
Take that,
settlements.
Bill Clinton.
That's right.
Yeah.
Congressional HR settlements is the money that our government has been secretly paying to silence people who have allegations of harassment and sexual assault and things like that against your elected officials. Members are going to need to pay settlements out of their own pockets, says Senator Sasse. We're going to prohibit members from buying or selling stock during their time in office. And I'll save the best one for last. So there's one more. President and vice presidential candidates must be required to disclose their tax returns. And here's my favorite: lifetime ban on members of Congress making money from lobbying. Well, gentlemen, this...
Take that, Clinton Foundation.
This sounds like a promising development. Stephen Green, is this just so much of a press release preparing for everybody's favorite challenger against President Trump in the 2020 primaries? Or do you think this is like a legitimate way to approach draining the swamp?
Well, it could be both of those things, couldn't it? I don't think those are necessarily mutually exclusive. Look, personally, I've got some problems with Ben Sasse just because he hasn't been a team player when we've got this slender lead in the Senate, and we need all the team players we can get to get legislation passed. And I think what he's going to find is this White House is not going to be very supportive of him in trying to get something like this through, because Ben Sasse has not been very supportive of this White House. That's the way this game is played, unfortunately. It doesn't matter how good or wise the legislation is. It matters how many votes you can get and how much presidential arm twisting might be required to make those votes happen. That said...
And Steve, he has specifically tied this to Trump's drain the swamp phrase. So he's explicitly saying, I am walking side by side with President Trump in this.
Well, there's a bit of a rebuke built into that, though, isn't there? You know, Mr. President, you've been in office nearly 2 years now, and it's up to me, a little old senator from Nebraska, to take care of this stuff for you. And listen, that was never one of the campaign promises of Trump's I ever took too seriously. Nobody who endorsed the Kelo decision is exactly a swamp drainer, in my view. There were a lot of other reasons to support Trump, and I did. And I do, but that was never one of the reasons. That was never one of the things I thought he would actually get much done in if and when he became president. And so far, I think that's been the case. What I'd like to reintroduce, though, is call it the Green Amendment to the Sasse legislation. And I think I've brought this up before, but I really like it. I don't believe in term limits. I believe that people should be able to elect whomever they choose. However, I would like to introduce an amendment to this legislation called Take an Oath of Office, Lose a Finger. So, say, for example, a 5-term congressman would be known as...
I like it already. You had me at lose a finger.
Yeah, a 5-term congressman would be known as Lefty. And you would be able to determine somebody's incumbency by a simple count of their remaining digits. And I think you would get people who are really dedicated to public service in case the Green Amendment were to become law.
What do you lop off after a guy's been president for 2 terms?
Well,
I don't
in
want to know
Clinton's
that.
case, we should have done that beforehand.
That's right. And with Stormy Daniels' new book on the horizon, I don't think we should talk about that.
No.
You know, it's that book, once you put it down, you simply cannot pick it up.
Yeah, Mario Kart is ruined forever. Don't Google that.
So, Bill Whittle, you remarked in our backstage meeting that is available to members only at billwhittle.com that the prospects of legislation that inhibit the ability of members of Congress from making money in the future seem somewhat dim. And, it's kind of like asking people, and I think you said asking guys in the prison what was it?
It's like the warden asking prison inmates if to take a vote on whether they'd like to go to bread and water rations, 14 whippings a day, and sleeping on beds of nails. What do you say, guys?
So is this just perhaps a bold measure or even a virtuous measure and not a political move, but still, nevertheless, has no chance of getting through and nobody's really serious about draining the swamp?
There are a lot of things I've seen in this strange career of ours that I didn't think were possible and became possible. Most of them were bad, but some of them were good. So it's not impossible, but it's extremely unlikely that Congress is going to vote itself out of its vote its hands out of other people's wallets. What is the chance of that happening? It's pretty near zero. And on some level, that makes me wonder if this isn't just virtue signaling because it seems unlikely. However, with that said, you can't get to a place of cynicism to the degree where you can't believe that actual change for the better is possible. I just look at what's going on with this government, Scott, and it's not a direct analogy, but for some reason, every time I look at what's going on in the big picture in this country, I'm reminded of that person who was asked, he said, I'm bankrupt. How did you go bankrupt? And he said, well, slowly at first and then very quickly. And that's kind of how I feel about this, is that we'd better do something pretty fast because the wheels are coming off in terms of the public confidence in the government. And these idiots in the government seem to think that that when the people don't trust them anymore, that's no problem. They may be in for a bit of a surprise. My personal feeling is the kind of person who's clearly seeking political office. Once it's clear that person's really trying to become a politician, the citizens need to take him out in the field and beat him soundly. And if he decides he wants to run again, then I think you have no choice but to simply, ask him to leave the planet.
Elon Musk is going to make that possible in the very near future.
Certainly is.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think here's the problem with legislation. It takes thought. It takes consideration of alternatives. It takes mulling through the consequences of making changes to the framework of government. And we are a people who live under a document of constraints in the sense that our government is constrained by its Constitution. And what I love about these proposals is it sounds like Senator Sasse has actually put some thought into it and said, what would it take? It's one thing to stand up on a campaign trail, and I'm not criticizing the president for this, but to say drain the swamp. But the tangible things that the president has done since then would include reducing the rate of hiring and, in fact, decreasing the number of civilian federal employees, freezing the salaries of civilian federal employees to, it's, in a sense, I think that kind of keeps the faithful there, the guys who are willing to do it because they really believe in it. And, making tangible, taking tangible actions. And I think what Sasse is saying here is let's make it so that the reward of government service is the duty itself. It is not beyond that. There is no additional reward. The benefit of serving as a member of a cabinet, the benefit of serving in Congress is that you get to be a congressman. You get to be a member of the president's cabinet, and then you're done. And then you go back and you live a normal life and you do not have your fingers in the pie or your hand in anybody's pocket. And I think when Republicans wake up to the fact that most of what really constitutes governance is in the details of processes and systems and structures and logistics and checks and balances. That stuff isn't sexy. It doesn't sell on the campaign trail. But that is the stuff that reform is made of. And we have to have serious legislators who are willing to dig into the details of that and think through the consequences and place constraints upon our government officials, frankly, to keep them from being tempted. I mean, think of it as doing something nice for your congressman. You don't want him to fall into that trap, do you? You want to help your congressman. Don't let him be tempted into that life of sin. Put up a barrier. Put the liquor bottle away when the drunk comes over to visit.
Bless your heart.
I'm just saying. Thank you.
Like to help
Ladies
him
and
do a
gentlemen,
swift kick in the ass.
I know that often I get comments on Facebook and YouTube and at BillWhittle.com that people think that I am naive about this. I'm not naive about this.
No, you're not.
I simply read about the history of why this country exists the way it does. I don't think human nature is going to change. And in fact, my argument here is from human nature. It's from the reality of human nature, and we must build the fence. If we're going to build a wall on our southern border, let's build a wall around our congressmen and elected officials to protect them from falling into this kind of egregious behavior. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.